to this computer. And everybody should be muted. You can double check. Please be muted because occasionally somebody will say things that don't really want to be recorded. And to that extent, you may want to turn off your camera because we are recording it and you may discover you're memorialized forever in this recording. Now, we will take questions, but put the questions in the chat and I'll be monitoring those. And towards the latter part of the talk, we'll ask Mike and Naomi to talk about that. Eventually, we'll post the recording to YouTube once it's available. And with that, let me see if I can now stop sharing my screen. You can see that we've got this massive number of people here. And I'm going to
So, Bill, I'm going to interrupt you for just a second. Is there a way you can eliminate the waiting room and let everyone in?
I don't know about that.
Okay. Because there are a bunch of people in the waiting room.
Yeah, we got them all just now.
Okay.
All set. Okay. No, there we go. Okay, you two are now spotlight, and I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
Oh, goodness. You're not going to introduce us, huh?
I'd rather have the two of you introduce yourself because you've had probably the people that joined early had a chance to hear what your conversation is. And rather than trying to give my take on things and just sort of read it, I think you will do a far better way of introducing yourselves in the personal side.
Okay. Well, I will start and say that I am very excited to have Mike Fitz join us this evening for this climate action group. Mike and I have worked together for the last 4 years, and every time I work with Mike, I learn something new. So I'm looking forward to learning a few things tonight. Mike Fitz is explore.org's resident naturalist. He has worked for the National Park Service for many years, and that's how I originally got to know Mike. And I have been a Bear Cam fan and a fan of the bears of Brooks Falls for many years, and in 2019 became an interpretive park ranger there. So today we wanted to talk about the ecosystem of the Brooks River in Katmai National Park and Alaska, and mainly about telling stories about this ecosystem and telling stories and how that can help us in motivating people to do something about climate change. As rangers, we use a technique in storytelling called interpretive storytelling. And Mike, can you tell us what interpretive storytelling is?
I'll do my best. And thanks, Naomi, for inviting me, and thanks for Bill for setting this up, and thanks to the climate group and everybody for joining tonight. So yeah, I'm eager to share my perspective. I think of interpretation as a communication strategy, and it uses intangible concepts that are familiar to everyone to facilitate meaningful connections within a person for whatever you're talking about. So it's really about helping people find personal relevance in a subject. I was first introduced to this concept during some internships with the National Park Service back in the early aughts. And it took me a while to sort of grasp the concept overall. It took me several seasons to feel like I was really kind of getting at the ways that I could use meaning to provide people with relevant stories and have them or help them have meaningful experiences in parks. So interpretation as a communication philosophy has a few tenets, at least from the perspective that I learned through my work as a park ranger. One of those, kind of main tenets is that your subject possesses meaning and has relevance. So whatever you're talking about, whether that's a historical event or that's a brown bear or a salmon or like a building of some significance or a place, whatever that is. And each thing means different things to different people. So a lot of the art in interpretation is helping people, different people find relevance in different ways, because people seek value of something for themselves when they're visiting parks, or when you're communicating a story to them, whether that's in writing or you're having a conversation. And I don't necessarily think that that's like a selfish thing on, from the human perspective, although it can kind of seem like that, but it's really just about finding ways to help people better understand something. So when we seek something of value, we're looking for like a meaningful experience in that sense. And kind of like the third tenet of interpretation is that it facilitates connections between meanings in a subject or a story and the interest of a person. So again, you're trying to pair the meanings that is inherent in a resource or ascribed in a subject and the interest of a person. And meanings in this sense, in this communication philosophy, are more important than information, although interpretation really can't happen without information. So it's vital that you have accurate information and that you have engaging information to frame the conversation or writing around. But the meanings are really the most important, and especially those that are universal concepts, big ticket things, big picture items, things that we all relate to and understand, but maybe not in the same way. So
Give an
things like
example of that, Mike.
yeah, for sure. Processes, ideas, relationships, things like change, survival, hunger. You're talking about animals, for example, talking about brown bears. Think about like the hunger that a brown bear might experience compared to our own, having to eat a year's worth of food in about 6 months to survive winter hibernation. The resilience that maybe we experience in our own lives and that other animals and organisms experience. When we're talking about stories of nations or personal liberty, you can be, stories of freedom and concepts associated with that. Talking about individual places, or ecosystems, you can talk about home, you can talk about stewardship, even things like wonder and challenge, awe and empathy. So they provoke both thought and emotion. And I think that's, the best interpretation looks to do both that. So they're just not focusing on the intellectual side of things, but definitely trying to provoke people's emotions as well.
Yeah, I think with this group, Stanford Alumni for Climate Action, we have been really searching best methods for getting people to do something about climate change, whether it's on a larger scale, trying to prevent something that might damage an area, or stop drilling and production of more carbon in the atmosphere. But we really want to figure out how we can motivate people to take action. And I think too often in areas like climate change, we put out the science, we put out the facts, but we don't interpret that. So what do people do with that? So can you think of ways that using interpretive techniques for storytelling might help people to be motivated to do something about climate change?
For sure. The whole point of interpretation is to help people make connections and find relevance. So I think it is quite valuable to climate change communication, especially since the reality of climate change can seem detached from the personal experience of a lot of people, especially those who haven't maybe necessarily felt the brunt of it. And I think a great advantage of interpretation is that it allows the storyteller to really use their creativity. So you can think of, if we do like a little thought experiment right now, just think of a tree, for example. What meanings can we ascribe to a tree? And think of it from different perspectives as well. For a woodworker or a logger, maybe a tree represents livelihood, it represents utility. For people of, many people of indigenous heritage and in various backgrounds, trees are family. So there's that idea is maybe represented. A tree matters to an animal. I can think of for a variety of reasons, like its shelter, its home, its food, its security. It probably does the same for us too. I know I certainly kind of feel, those things when I'm in my home forest. And for an ecosystem, a tree, it means other things. It means health, It means stability. In other ways, we can see things like beauty in a tree. We can see life. We can see longevity. We can see strength. So those are meanings that we can use to help people connect to maybe the stories of trees or forests. And stories of individual trees or individual organisms can be even more specific. So if you're looking to tie, some of these meanings to places, you can do that. So I'm in northern Maine right now, and the trees behind my house are located on old agricultural land that has been abandoned and is regrowing into a forest. So just from the human perspective, the stories behind me or the trees behind me tell stories of change, of colonial settlement, of competition, of work, industrialization, loss, and rebirth in a sense. And their presence also reflects the resiliency of life and maybe the joy that they can bring to us. And I feel like those things when I go out into the forest. So climate change, since it's drastically altering, the planet and forest, we can frame, the story of a tree or a forest around one or more, meanings that we associate with it. And especially those that are most relevant to the audience. You have to know a little bit about your audience when you're trying to work towards this. Is it, are you talking to the general public, or are you talking more specifically to a group of people who maybe live or hunt in the forest, for example? So you may want to target, and identify what meanings you want to develop your story around based on that. And connecting that the proper information with, a tree in the right way can make like the trees in the forest matter to us all. It's really just about, helping people experience empathy for human and non-human creatures alike. And I think empathy, once we feel empathy for those things, it really can serve us to motivate us to take further action.
Yeah, I like your point also about understanding the audience. I mean, and that just harkens back to marketing strategies. I mean, I spent a lot of time working in large corporations, and one of the tenets of marketing strategy is knowing your audience. And to some people, a tree is a tree, but the history or the context of that tree where they live could open their eyes to other things and to the importance of climate change. So, but people don't always think about the audience. They're just trying to get the information out there. And I think a big part of interpretation is understanding not only our goals, but to whom we're speaking. So you've worked many years at Katmai National Park and Preserve, which are the videos behind both of us. That's Brooks Falls. And you are the maestro of interpretive techniques of the natural world, and in particular, the Brooks River. And you have written a book, The Bears of Brooks Falls, which I think is a really great work of interpretation about this ecosystem and about the Brooks River. Stop sharing and I've lost something here. So can you tell us a little bit about the Brooks River and just where it is, so maybe we can get a better understanding about how you've used interpretive techniques to support and protect this ecosystem?
Yeah, it's a special place. So it's located in Katmai National Park, Alaska, on the Alaska Peninsula. And this area is about 4 million acres in size. So it's larger than any national park in the contiguous 48 states. Let me share my screen here, because I can go to Google Earth and maybe take a little tour.
And while you're doing that, I'm going to remind people that if they have questions, they can put them in the chat and we will answer your questions at the end.
Okay, yeah, so now that we're looking at Google Earth here, we could see, the broad base of Alaska as a whole. Alaska is a huge area. Katmai National Park is only a small subsection of it, but this area is larger than any national park in the contiguous 48 states. I think it's about the size of Connecticut overall, so about 4 million acres, if I remember correctly. This area is almost completely roadless. The only way to get into Katmai is by plane or boat. There's a small town of king salmon to the west of the park, and there's like one little sliver of road that kind of enters into the west side of the park, but it sort of just ends right there. And then near Brooks River, there are some associated tourist facilities with like some roads, but they don't lead to anywhere else except basically to further afield in the park, and they just sort of like end at various locations. So this is the entirety of Brooks River. It's only 1.5 miles long overall. And growing up in Western Pennsylvania, where I did, I grew up near the Allegheny and Ohio rivers, and looking at Brooks River, this is not a river at all compared to those. I mean, this is the dinky place. It's just like a little creek in a sense, but it's really unlike any other place. It has harbored people for at least 5,000 years, probably longer. The archaeological record so far only indicates 5,000 years, but I'm sure people inhabited it longer. We just haven't found that direct evidence of it yet. And it's one of the most densely occupied places continuously in Alaska for the last 5,000 years. There's a near continuous record of people inhabiting this place over that time span. And also maybe today, most conspicuously, is the fact that it is home to hundreds of thousands of salmon each summer. So, it's amazing to see just what that looks like when you are seeing a river that is just full of fish. So many fish that if I were to describe it, you maybe would have a hard time imagining. So like, I want to share just a short video here. Let me find the right one of salmon at Brooks Falls. Just this video here just focuses on salmon. Let me play it for everybody. The river, it may be a little bit hard to see, but the river is just full of thousands and thousands of fish. So this is part of the Bristol Bay run of salmon in Alaska, really the last great salmon run left on Earth. And it's really quite remarkable to see. And then it ends up attracting dozens of brown bears to this salmon run each and every year. There we go. So we have a picture of 128, who's nicknamed Grazer here, standing on the lip of the waterfall, not very hungry on this day because there are so many salmon in the water. So this is an ecosystem that's really operating on its fully realized potential. It's a tremendous place. And I was not prepared for the wildness of this land when I first went there in 2007.
So tell me a little bit about that. I mean, when you say the wildness, what surprised you?
Yeah, when I went there first, I was not sort of new to wild areas. I had been a park ranger for a number of years, various places. Like I worked at Mount Rainier. Prior to this, I worked at Death Valley, Crossbody Caverns, a bunch of other places. But I had never had the experience of exploring a landscape like Katmai. It's an ecosystem that's functioning at its fully realized potential. And what I mean by that is Katmai and Brooks River aren't missing any species or pieces of the puzzle due to human causes. And Katmai, and again, that's about an area about the size of Connecticut, has watersheds that are completely unengineered by people. So there are no dams, there are no water diversion projects. We don't take its water for agriculture or irrigation or navigational purposes. So non-human processes dominate on a landscape scale. And climate change is altering that, of course, but it's really a place where you can see natural processes, non-human processes at work generally without our interference. And its salmon runs, again, they're exceptional. Last year, more than 76 million salmon returned to the Bristol Bay area, and the Brooks River area is just kind of like a small sliver of that landscape. But it's just so remarkable to see. And last year we saw more than 100 different brown bears visiting Brooks River to fish for salmon. So Bristol Bay and Katmai, they kind of showcase an ecosystem that's operating at its fully realized potential.
So what can a story like that, how can a story like that help us to motivate people to do something about climate change? Because, I mean, we know there are threats to this ecosystem, and we have seen climate change. A few years ago, we had 10 days of 90-degree heat, which is unprecedented in Alaska, and completely stopped the salmon run for 10 days. But frequently when people are telling stories about climate change, they're talking about California, right? And catastrophes and storms. But here we have a very healthy ecosystem. So how do we translate that into a story that can motivate people?
Well, overall, like the story of the ecosystem itself, I think is a story of hope and potential. When we look to try to work to restore salmon runs in other parts of North America, not only on the west coast of the United States, but also in my area of Maine, where Atlantic salmon runs are just hanging on by a thread. Bristol Bay and Brooks River, kind of showcase what healthy salmon runs can bring to a place. The ecosystem is made richer because of the salmon. The economy of the area is based on salmon. The indigenous cultures are centered around salmon. So it's you have like this keystone that's showcasing what it can do for a place, and that offers us, I think, a lot of hope for other places that are experiencing where the salmon runs especially are not doing well, or faring very, very poorly in a lot of locations. So we have this place where you don't have to consult history books for, like, I was thinking about this today, like when you read about like what bison herds used to be like on the mid-continent of North America, I can't imagine, herds of tens of thousands of bison. They just don't exist anymore. And, the Columbia River watershed or some of these other major watersheds on the west coast of the United States used to have millions and millions of salmon pouring into them. And it's hard for us to imagine because our baseline has shifted to this level of impoverishment, right? Where we sort of think that like a few thousand salmon going into these streams is normal, when it probably wasn't. So I think it offers like these stories of hope and resiliency. It also showcases what a diversity of habitats and watersheds, how that in particular, like the lakes and the streams and all of the little rivulets that feed into these places, help to make the place stronger as a whole. So it's not necessarily just the fact that there's like Brooks River. There's the watersheds or the upstream of Brooks River itself. There's the lakes where salmon can find refuge during droughts or times where the water temperatures are too high. And there's certainly, many threats to the Katmai National Park itself, and climate change is a big one. But yeah, I think it's showcasing, again, stories of hope. And if we can, give people opportunities to say, hey, there are places that operate like they should be, then that gives us something to work towards for other places in the world.
I also think that the Brooks River is a good example of the interconnectedness of so many living elements, including people, right? I mean, we often separate non-human life, flora and fauna, from us, but here is a long history of an interdependency of all of that life, and flora, fauna, humans, and so it's I think a good tool to show how an interdependent ecosystem can work. I mean, even the connection to the ocean, right? I mean, the warming oceans could affect the Brooks River.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. This, no matter how well we protect like Brooks River's physical landscape and the freshwater habitats, what happens in the ocean can greatly impact the ecosystem itself. So again, this these stories, the Brooks River is not an island in a metaphorical sense or an actual sense. It is certainly affected by the things, the decisions that we make today, and that we can kind of use those stories of that to maybe help people maybe better understand our decisions are impacting the planet in different ways and in different places. Ocean productivity for salmon, for example, naturally fluctuates, across decades or even centuries. But through warming water temperatures and ocean acidification, the North Pacific could reach tipping points that greatly reduce salmon survival. Now, luckily, that hasn't really been a factor for the Bristol Bay sockeye. They're booming right now, at historic highs, higher than they were 100 years ago. So things are really kind of like in a sweet spot for the sockeye salmon, but that's not the case for other salmon on the west coast of the United States and other salmon runs in Alaska too. I mean, there's reasons for major concern for like chum salmon runs and king salmon runs in different parts of the state that have essentially collapsed. Yeah, when we think about how Brooks River is connected to the rest of the world, again, it can it motivates me to act on climate change because Katmai is a well-protected landscape physically. It's a national park. There are very strict rules about what you can do there. You can't just go in and start bulldozing a stream or put up a dam or whatever it is. Most of it is federally designated wilderness. So even if the federal government wanted to do that, there are very strict laws that would prevent that sort of thing. But our actions certainly have a major impact on that ecosystem.
What are the threats to this ecosystem?
Yeah, well, there's several. Like most national parks, post 2020, visitation has skyrocketed, especially at Brooks River. So that exacerbates longstanding issues regarding like infrastructure, old infrastructure, and staffing, whether they have enough rangers and other support staff. Bear and human conflict too, because last year there was about 16,000 people that visited Brooks River, and you have a few dozen brown bears walking around. There's a lot of people running into a lot of bears in a lot of situations in a lot of places. So there's that sort of thing, and you'll see articles maybe recently about like, hey, these are the least visited national parks. Go there to get away from the crowd, and they always include Katmai, right? And there are places in Katmai where you can go. I've been in places in Katmai, not seen another person for a whole week. It's been just wonderful experiences. I can just go there and not use my voice for a long, long time. But if you go to Brooks River, you're going to find a lot of people. So they don't necessarily, those stories don't get into those nuances about how, the developed areas of like Katmai or even some of the more popular backcountry bear watching areas do experience a lot of people visiting them. So there's those issues. Outside of the park, north of the park, the mining companies are ogling deposits of gold and copper. So again, that's in the Bristol Bay area. It's outside of Katmai, but well within areas that continue to support large salmon runs. But overall, I think the greatest threat to the place itself is climate change and how that will alter watersheds and hydrology and the oceans. And it all kind of ties back to the salmon themselves. The bears probably do okay because they're adaptable critters. They're omnivores, so they eat a wide variety of foods, but really the productivity of the ecosystem in the bear population, and like I mentioned, the economy of Bristol Bay and the cultures are all sort of like so closely tied to salmon that if the salmon runs collapse, then it's going to be disaster for the area.
Yeah, I also think there's a conundrum about promoting visitation to national parks, which when we're talking about carbon footprints, takes a lot of carbon to get to Katmai from from the rest of the world. And you've been one of the seminal people in developing the bear cams. And I know a lot of the bear cam fans are watching this tonight, but for those who don't know about that, can you talk a little bit about that? And I also think talk about it as a way that it's a help in stemming the tide of threats and climate change to the park.
Right. In 2012, the National Park Service entered an agreement with Explore.org to stream live webcams of bears fishing for salmon at Brooks River. And at the time, I really didn't realize how important that experience would become in the lives of people around the world. National parks, in a way, aren't truly accessible spaces because people experience a lot of barriers that prevent them from visiting in person. So the webcams aren't a substitute for a physical visit to Brooks River, but they're a different type of experience. And in some ways, they're a richer experience. I think, Naomi, you would argue this towards this point as well, that you get to watch bears not only for a few hours or a few days, if like you would if you were to fly to Brooks River, but you get to watch bears across seasons and years. So right now, the webcams have been streaming live that we're seeing bears that were just first year cubs growing into very big adults right now at the river. So we're getting to see really like their whole entire lives. And we're able to interpret those stories. And my last answers to the last few questions haven't been very interpretive. They've been more factual, I think, than anything else. But working with Explore.org, I consider myself to be a naturalist who just helps people have meaningful wildlife watching experiences. So I'm still using these interpretive techniques. I'm still trying to connect people with brown bears and salmon and with katmai in meaningful ways to motivate them to become stewards of this place, or at least have a meaningful wildlife watching experience. And I
No,
like to use.
Yeah,
Sorry,
go ahead.
no, well,
No,
I was just gonna.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say that I maybe you were gonna ask me about this, but I like to use the stories of individual bears in particular to give people perspective on the bear world. Maybe that's where the next question is going.
Yeah, I was going there because you did a survey of bear cam viewers. And I think it gives us a lot of insight into motivating people and what motivates people to protect an environment. Can you tell us a little bit about that survey?
Yeah, we ran an online survey. Well, I shouldn't say we. So myself and some research colleagues, Lynn Lewis from Bates College in Maine, Leslie Richardson, who works for the National Park Service Denver Service Center, and Jeffrey Skibbins, who is a professor at East Carolina University. So we developed a survey to ask a bunch of different things. We're all interested in kind of like different stuff. But one of the things that we got to in the survey, among many things, is that whether people could identify individual bears. So that's a big part of the interpretation strategy that I use through the bear cams. I talk about individual bears, I talk about their lives, I identify them. I use numbers and nicknames to identify people and encourage people to keep track of what individual bears are doing. So we asked people some questions about that. One of the questions we asked is like, could you identify individual bears when you're watching the cameras? And most people said yes, at least sometimes. A lot of people said all the time. Most people said at least sometimes. And we didn't test their ID skills because people recognize bears in different ways. A lot of times they use, the monikers that I'm assigning to the bears, like a name or a number, but a lot of times they're not. They're just like, hey, I like the bear with the fluffy blonde ears, and they like look for that bear on a daily basis until they maybe learn that it has a number or something like that. So it was most important that we documented that they could ID an individual, because in follow-up questions, we asked people about their willingness to support conservation programs, regarding bears. And respondents said that they could, respondents that said they could identify bears also reported significantly higher levels of support for conservation and also a positive emotional connection with bears themselves. So one major takeaway from the survey is that connections with individual animals and interpreting the lives of individual animals help build support for species conservation. It's not like, any individual bear at Brooks River is more important than the viability of the bear population as a whole. It's really that the story of that bear resonates with people, and through that bear, people care more strongly for bears overall. And I think this can be applied to efforts for other species as well.
Yeah. And I think, go back to your story about the tree, right? Your story is related to a tree. I think it can be, I think it's very insightful for stories about climate change in many places, because it's that connection and it becomes a personal connection. And so how do we tell stories where, not necessarily at Brooks, but maybe in our own backyards, and making that leap from being committed to protect the bears of the Brooks River to finding that interpretive connection to where we live.
Yeah, exactly. It's, again, it's about finding personal relevance. We can use, I think, Naomi, both of us can come up with many examples of how the Bears at Brooks River tell um, the stories that are relevant to audiences around the world. I think maybe the most famous example of that is Otis, the brown bear. He's a perennial bear camp favorite. People look for his return every year. He's an older adult male. He's in his mid-20s right now. And by talking about his story, it's we can make his story like meaningful for the audience by discussing like his resilience in the face of challenge. He still gets the job done. He still gets fat in the fall, even though he's an older bear and he can't compete for the best fishing spots like he used to. Through highlighting his work ethic. That's something that people relate to. All of us relate to, is like a sense of work and value, and want to be efficient in our job. And we want to be skillful in our jobs, no matter what we happen to be doing. Otis is extremely efficient. He has a high work ethic. He's extremely skillful when fishing for salmon. And then we can connect his story to climate change, maybe not overtly. I'm not talking about Otis and being and like pounding people over the head with this, climate change bludgeon. But again, talking about the story of how Otis gets fat on salmon, and he's dependent on salmon, and the survival of bears like him in Katmai's ecosystem as we know it is dependent on the survival of salmon. And then we start conversations that were related to climate change and how that might affect salmon and changing conditions for those fish.
Yeah, I mean, because it's a very good example, because so often we're looking at the big picture instead of using specific examples. I mean, that's how scientists study. They like to study bears populations, right? So they talk about things in terms of population rather than individuals or individual places. You were the, I will say, genius behind Fat Bear Week.
That's a stretch.
Not much. Which I think has been a very successful example of interpretation. And can you just briefly talk about Fat Bear Week and how that is an interpretive technique?
For sure. And I'm going to assume that maybe some people here don't know about Fat Bear Week. And if you don't, what are you doing? So but you won't have to worry about it till October, I guess, or late September this year. But Fat Bear Week is a online virtual competition where Explore.org and the National Park Service at Katmai, we develop basically a bracket like you would for a tournament. And we pair different bears together with before and after pictures, early summer pictures and late summer pictures. And we say, which bear do you think is the most successful, fattest bear of the year? So it starts out with 12 bears, gets winnowed down just to a pair. And then the winner is called the Fat Bear Champion. I started this when I was a ranger at Katmai, just sort of as a lark one day, brainstorming this idea with a few other park rangers. We did the kind of like a one-day thing called Fat Bear Tuesday. This is in 2014. We did it on Facebook. We were like, hey, which bear do you think is the fattest? Here's our bracket. And people voted with their likes at the time. And it had more engagement than anything else that we had ever attempted. Like, it was off the charts. So that day I was like, we need to expand this into a whole week to give more people the opportunity to participate. And it's just really grown in popularity since then. So it's kind of like a gimmicky thing, but at the same time, it's really a celebration of the success of the bears and an opportunity to highlight the reasons that bears get fat to survive because they're hibernators. So again, thinking about their hibernation physiology, how that's important to them, inspiring wonder and awe for brown bears in that way. And I think a lot of people, when they learn about hibernation physiology and the work that bears put in to get fat, I mean, I think they are awed by that aspect of the bear world. And then it also, it gives us an opportunity to celebrate and reflect upon the importance of salmon once again. So, in Fat Bear Week, we talk about the individual bears, we highlight the challenges that different bears face, the resiliency over the course of the year, the changes they experienced each year, the hunger they feel, and also, again, the importance of the salmon. So we're often talking about, again, those big ticket interpret or universal concepts that you can interpret and connect audiences with. So things like challenge and change and resilience and hunger and survival, and awe and wonder. Those are things that really can inspire people to care just a little bit more. And Fat Bear Week, I think, is just one of those many tools that we utilize each year to try to make that happen.
And I think also when we make the brackets for Fat Bear Week, we're thinking about the stories, right? We're not just saying,
sure.
oh, well, we should pit this bear against this bear, but it's what story do we tell by pitting bear A with bear against bear B? And so every time there's a vote, there's another interpretive story about, for instance, sows and cubs and or dominance, and so that people really get connected. And I had another example where I felt like people are motivated. It's the result of this kind of interpretive storytelling. I usually interview Dr. Michael Saxton, who's a bear biologist, and I interview him on the cams each year. And I remember the first time I interviewed him, and I got a comment in the chat, and it said, "Great interview, Naomi, except you didn't ask the most important question. Does Michael still need more money for his research?" And that really was enlightening to me. And people started sending money. I mean, I think there was like $20,000 raised because of that interview with Michael Saxton for his genetic research. So I think that the trick for all of us is to take these lessons and these techniques and translate them and use them in other parts of our lives, in motivating people to do something about climate change. I think that for most of us who live very kind of middle class existences, we can ignore a lot of this. And especially if we're not young, young people love Fat Bear Week, and young people are more motivated to do something about climate change because they're the ones who are going to really face the changes. Although it's here now and we're feeling those effects in many places, young people are really going to see the effects of that. And so making that connection to young people to give them paths to do something, right? And it makes me think of when I have conversations with you, it frequently comes up about your personal choices related to climate change. You seem very aware of your carbon footprint. Like, well, it's really not worth my going to the West Coast for this meeting because it's a big carbon footprint. Or maybe I shouldn't go to Katmai this second time because that's a big carbon footprint. And you have a blog where you recently talked about your adventure with your electric car. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think it highlighted some of the obstacles that we face in trying to personally do something to limit our carbon footprint.
Yeah, it's tough. And oftentimes we don't have a choice because our system is just our infrastructure is just sort of set up in a way where we have a high carbon footprint no matter what. I think there was a story I read a couple of years ago about how even like a homeless person has a higher carbon footprint than than other people around the world, just because of the way the United States is set up. Even though they're unhoused, like they don't actually have a building for themselves. But I don't know if you can call us an early EV adopter, my household at least, but when I was living in Washington State in 2019, and my wife had this unreasonably long commute, and I crunched some basic numbers, and I was like, look, if we got an electric car we could save a lot of money on gasoline. And, our power at the time was coming from hydropower. So, theoretically, at least, it doesn't have like the carbon footprint of a coal-fired power plant or something like that. We had never taken the car really on a long trip until late November, early December this year. We drove it from northern Maine to Pittsburgh and Cleveland and back. And, definitely there's still a lot of challenges associated with that. The infrastructure for charging stations, especially that weekend of Thanksgiving, it's just not there when there's a lot of people driving on the roads. Yet we had to wait in line a lot. The after Thanksgiving weekend, came and went, then we didn't really have to worry about it at charging stations. But that weekend, certainly there was issues with broken chargers and things like that. And then we had to take our time as well, because there's just not that many chargers along the way. So if we wanted to do one of those like 600-mile days, it would have been a lot harder to do so, given the car's range and having to charge every option. But overall, it was certainly feasible. And a lot of things, one of the reasons that people don't adopt EVs, I think, is because they don't think they're practical, and they certainly are. They're not as convenient currently as a internal combustion engine, but they're certainly doable. We don't have a public charging station within 40 miles of us where we live here in northern Maine, and not one of the level 3 fast, the very fast chargers. We don't have one of those that's compatible with our car for about 100 miles. But we get it done. So it can be done even in cold climates. You just have to be, kind of patient and plan things out currently. But yeah, I do think about how those things impact other people or not. The thing that I want to do, I've converted my house to completely electric, except for our wood stove that we use on cold winter nights only. But everything else in our house is powered by electricity, and I'm really jonesing for some solar panels. That's like the next big jump for me. I should have done it by now, but just working to save up a little bit more money before I make that commitment.
Yeah, in Massachusetts, where I live, there's been a lot of support for solar. So in my neighborhood, which is very middle class neighborhood in New Bedford, which is it's not a rich community. I see solar panels everywhere, which to me is a really good sign. So wanting to join. So your story also reminds me of how our own lives push us away from making changes about climate change, because we have so much to do, and it can be tough to make those changes. So I think that interpretive storytelling is a way to get people to think about the importance of making those changes and what we are losing by not making those changes. It's not what we will lose, but what we are losing already. So, Mike, I really wanted to thank you for joining us. I hope this inspires some people to think about the stories that they can tell to motivate people. And we do have some questions. Bill, do you have questions from people?
I do. Why don't we start? It's actually in reverse order. The initial question, or this one, was, how can we connect to read your blog?
Yeah, it's at fitznaturalist.com. So that's FITZ naturalist.com. I was on, this is an unrelated story, but sometimes I think of this. I was interviewed on the Weather Channel about hummingbirds one day, and the anchor, instead of calling me a naturalist, called me a naturist. So don't type in that word. So I didn't correct him on there, but the next time I did this other short interview on the Weather Channel once, and I thought about doing it without my shirt on, just to prank him, but I didn't have the guts to go with it. But yeah, it's fitznaturalist.com. And I don't update it all the time. It depends on how much motivation I have and time and things like that. But I do try to write a few things a year.
Well, I put it in the chat, so people have it there. So next question, again, it's sort of different orders. In your opinion, how do we stress the threats to our politicians where they will really listen? Need more influential supporters? I know we have to vote the right way, but what can that but that can also be difficult to know if politicians will stand on their record.
Yeah, I've thought about those things as well, um, gosh, I wish, I had an answer for that, like a great one. Um, it is about voting, again, for people who are committed to act, and trying to hold them accountable, writing to them. Sometimes that doesn't work. I know I went to the Maine State House last year to lobby my state senator for a bill that he eventually did not vote for. I probably was the only person who talked to him about it, so I was disappointed in that sense. Um, and that was my first experience, like going to a state house or really speaking to any politician in person. But yeah, letting them know and trying to personalize those stories again. If you wanted to try to interpret how those things are changing for you, if you are an elder like in your community, you can talk about how things have changed, how you're seeing that, how you're concerned about future generations. And if you're younger, you can talk about the changes that are projected to come and how that's going to make your life, you're more concerned about your lives and potential children that you might have, or family members and those sorts of things. I don't have kids myself, but I do worry greatly for the people in my family who do have children. So it's difficult. Like it shouldn't be a partisan issue at all. It's unfortunate that it is. I think it's really unfortunate that we didn't start making this clean energy transition in the 1990s. It would have been so much easier. And now, due to all the stonewalling that happened for all the different reasons, we're at this point where we have to make changes a lot quicker than we would have done if, like, when I was a teenager in the 1990s. I wish, sometimes I wish I would have been the Greta Thunberg of the 1990s. I didn't have the knowledge then. I didn't have the awareness. I just wasn't there. I was just trying to find my lane at the time, and stay out of people's way. So yeah, I guess, now we have that opportunity to continue to fight for it. And I think, it's becoming an issue that's present in every election now, thankfully, but it's taken a lot longer than it should have. But yeah, I think, trying to make those issues personal for the politician, and because they do care. I hope they care about their constituents and not their ideology, but there's a lot of evidence to the contrary of that. So yeah, I wish I had a better answer, but yeah, trying to interpret those stories for the politicians may be a way to help. I always try to do that when I'm writing, and lobbying my elected officials.
That's a good suggestions. Yeah, one thing like you, I should have been more active earlier, but shouldn't be holding ourselves too much at fault. And that once you've seen things like Fat Bear Week, or once you have experienced the nature, you realize, okay, now we do have to make choices and do that.
And another point that I would like to make is that we need to pass along these stories to generations. And one of the things that was really wonderful for me to see being in Alaska was how important oral histories still are in Indigenous communities. And we have lost that importance of oral history. And there are examples of oral histories from generations back saving lives, and I think that's something that we can look to pass on. As Mike says, if you're an elder and you can talk about how things have changed, that's something to keep passing along to generations, so that we don't forget.
Very good point. The first question that had come in was, while you were talking about it, you might have actually, it came in just as you started talking about it. And it is, what is your vision of an ideal way to manage the huge visitation to Brooks Camp? You talked about it. Is there anything more you'd want to add to that?
Well, Brooks Camp is a small space overall, especially in comparison to, Katmai's landscape. So it's there's a carrying capacity to that. I would like to see the National Park Service sort of establish what is like the actual carrying capacity for the river as far as like wildlife goes, and then and how people affect that. So like the human carrying capacity in that sense, what's that threshold beyond which we don't want to affect the wildlife that's there. No one's ever really looked at that scientifically. I think the Park Service probably has the numbers for it through their bear monitoring program, maybe just as a matter of devoting like the staff to crunching those numbers and maybe doing a few follow-up studies for a couple of summers. But overall, national parks can't support unlimited people. And for a long, long time, and even today, we kind of think of them as successful if they attract greater and greater amounts of visitors, sort of like the economy, right? Like the economy is always like touted, like it has to grow forever or whatever. And I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to get into that. But national parks were, thought of as being successful if that was the case, if visitation crept up each and every year. But now these places are getting to a point where they are just full of people, and there's just not space for a lot of people. There's not parking. On certain trailheads, there's not room. At like Zion National Park, for example, to hike like Angel's Landing, you have to get a permit now. At Yosemite National Park, to hike Half Dome, you have to get a permit in advance, because it was like the Chilkoot Trail before that, where it's just like a string of people going up the mountain. You can see pictures of that. It was really just beyond like that, the carrying capacity for the experience itself. So there's a threshold of visitors where there's too many people that start to impact the experience of people. So I think at Brooks River, they also have to look at day use limits as well. And it really, really pains me. I want to emphasize this. It pains me to think that there's going to be times and spaces where we can't say, hey, come and enjoy your park. But we're at that point in time where there are just so many people wanting to experience these spaces that it's come to that right now. But I think if we do it right, we can give people, again, still valuable experiences in the park. We can spread that out. We can look to alternative ways like webcams and technology to help people have meaningful national park experiences. Again, not the same, not a substitute, but they are ways to help bridge some of these barriers and help maybe alleviate crowding situations, because Brooks River can't handle, I don't think more people than it already has. It's probably already beyond its threshold.
Yeah.
It's also, which we haven't talked about, the influence of commercial interests, both to politicians and to, oil companies. We've talked a lot about this in this group, and you're fighting against those interests, and that's a tough battle. And we think about Pebble Mine, which we thought was a mining project north of Katmai, and we thought that was dead 20 years ago. I mean, it would completely destroy the Bristol Bay ecosystem, and then it surfaced again, and EPA said no, it can't happen, and now the mining company is suing the EPA. So it's whack-a-mole. And I think we have to be vigilant with that. And there are a lot of commercial interests that want a lot of people to visit the national parks.
Yeah, interesting. There was one other question, which is more an observation. Just read it and see if you have any comments on it. We put solar on our Sierra Foothills house in 2002. One of the first setups, and paid for itself in 5 years, not the 15 it was expected. So it's a good story.
That's extra motivation for me, for sure, especially since the cost of solar installation and solar panels has gone way down per kilowatt hour compared to what it was in 2002. So yeah, I'm going to try to do more research onto that, and hopefully, sometime in the next few years, I can brag on my blog about having solar panels on my house.
Definitely. Now, this is probably one of the best questions. Save it to the last. and it sort of ties into a bunch of other things you've been talking about. Mike, what are your favorite organizations for us to consider for our donation dollars?
Yeah, well, even if you don't have money to donate to organizations, you can always go to explore.org and watch the webcams there and learn about different organizations around the world who we partner with. Explore.org is free. There are no ads on it. So you can go there, you can watch anytime, watch animals in nature. With brown bears and Katmai National Park, I'm a full disclosure, I'm a volunteer board member on the Katmai Conservancy. So we work to support directly Katmai National Park. So I would welcome anybody to consider, donating to that organization over the years. Like this year, we're going to fund ranger salaries, buying equipment, funding studies to learn about more things in the park. So we're doing a lot of different things to support them. One of the other organizations through explore.org that I learned about is the Gorilla Rehabilitation and Conservation Education Center in the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is in the North Kivu province. It's an area I was reading about today that is just experiencing a tremendous amount of unrest, warfare over years, and a refugee crisis. But there's this village in that province that has a gorilla rehabilitation center, and really they're dedicated to this family of gorillas these are all different individuals from different gorilla families that were rescued from poachers. They're put into the sanctuary with the hope in the future of rewilding them. So once the habitat becomes stable, they can rewild them once again. And this whole community is in support of this rehabilitation center. So it's not one of those examples of conservation being forced upon this group of people from the outside. It is this community of people that is committed to this facility, and the Grace facility is the largest employer in this community. So if you can help them, again, you're helping support gorilla conservation in Central Africa, and also people who are really dealing with they've dealt with the Ebola crisis, they've gone through COVID, and warfare. So there's a lot of stuff that they're dealing with, but they persevere, and they are caring for these gorillas in the hopes that that subspecies of gorilla, the growers gorilla, can once again have healthy and viable populations.
Are there webcams there?
Yes, yeah, we do have a webcam there. Best times to watch Eastern time is usually 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern time. So it happens kind of early in the morning if you're on the West Coast, but you can look at the replays too and get views of the gorillas that kind of come and hang out. You get to know the individuals too. They have a big 15-acre enclosure, and you can't always see them, but you get to see them hanging out and doing gorilla things when they come to the camera area.
So that's on the explore.org.
Yes, yeah, you can go to explore.org. If you go use the search button at the upper right on explore.org, just type in gorillas, and it'll pop up for you. And it's a really easy way to find it. Or you can just type in, the acronym is GRACE. So if you just type in GRACE Gorillas, then you'll be able to find their website pretty easily.
Great.
Mike, can you talk just a little bit more about what people can find on explore.org?
Yeah, explore.org is a philanthropic organization. It's an arm of the Annenberg Foundation, and we have more than 180 webcams around the world, highlighting nature and scenery, wildlife, and then we also have cameras at different animal sanctuaries as well. So it's just it's a means to help people have meaningful, nature-based and animal-based experiences over the internet. So the most popular webcam is the brown bears in Katmai National Park. So that's what I'm doing most of the time in the summer. I'm all bears all the time. But you can go there, you can watch puffins in the summertime. Right now we have bald eagle cameras that are very popular. We just the newest camera that we put up today is of a wren's nest in Texas. So if you want to watch a Buick's wren and her little tiny chicks that are they're little pinkies right now. They're tiny, their eyes aren't open yet. We have that camera available right now too. So yeah, if you're working at a desk sometime, or if you just want something calming to put on your television at night instead of the usual BS that we can find in television, you can throw on explore.org and enjoy some nature.
Great. One last question, and then we'll sort of do a wrap up. Before I start my genetics lesson for the week, I tell my students a short story about one of the bears. And at the beginning of the semester, the students are kind of baffled. But by the end, most of them tell me about how much they enjoyed learning about them. So sort of affirmation of what you're doing is the right thing.
I'm glad to hear that. I love to know that teachers are using the webcams in their classrooms. I know Fat Bear Week has become more popular, especially with like elementary school teachers, because that's something like that like younger students can grasp really easily. But yeah, one of the things that I learned in college is that environmental education can be part of all education. You can, if you're a math teacher, you can find environmental aspects to your math lessons. If you're a physics teacher, you can do the same thing. There's wonderful works of literature. So if you're an English teacher, you can look at that. My favorite book of all time is the Sand County Almanac, which I hope everyone here is familiar with. But if you're not, read that. I try to read that every year. It's just an amazing book. So yeah, all education is environmental education if you want it to be. So yeah, thanks for making that effort to share the bears with your students.
So with that, anything else? I've got about 8 questions, but I'm not going to ask them. I'll do that at another time. Anything you want to sort of as a final sign off? Any final comments?
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for joining me and listening. And Bill, thanks for, again, setting this up and doing the technical aspects of it. And thanks to this, the Stanford Climate Group for listening, and Naomi for doing the interview and thinking of the questions in advance. Again, going back to like interpretation, if I'm doing my job well, you're going to be able to find, personal relevance and in the programming that I do associated with like the bears and salmon at Katmai National Park. So think about how you can apply that maybe to your conversations or your stories about climate change. Making those ideas personally relevant. Catherine Hayhoe, who is an outspoken climate change communicator, she says, like Bill, you've said, one of the most important things you can do is talk about climate change. So, the more that we can kind of incorporate, I think, these ideas and these conversations into our daily lives, the closer we're going to get, towards, meaningful action. So it's going to be a long process, of course, but yeah, I hope I gave everybody a few tidbits on how to make that more successful.
From the looks of the comments, you absolutely did. Naomi, any final comments?
No, I'm just very grateful that Mike could join us. And as I said at the beginning, every time I speak with Mike, I learn something, and I learned a few things tonight.
All right. Well, let me see if I can share my screen again. I've got all sorts of stuff in the way for hard to see it. But you'll see that we have there'll be it was recorded, as I said, and you can see where you can look for it. See if I can actually get to the last email or last thing here. And let me try to get rid of these things. Close that. So I've hidden my screen here. So there we go. Oh, well. So we're going to be having another class, or the next talk will be Gerald Torres, and there's information there about it. It's going to be May 4th, 5 p.m. There's a tiny URL for getting to it. And you can see that it's simply https://tinyurl.com/Saka-Torres. So it makes it real simple to sign up for it, to register. With that, I want to thank everybody for participating in this, for making it a very interesting time for me, certainly, and hope you all did also and enjoyed it. With that, I will turn off the recording and say good night to everybody. Thank you very much.